In this video, I'm going to tell you how to buy your miniatures and terrain so that you can use them in multiple games and save yourself some money. A common complaint that I hear from people who play Wargaming tabletop miniatures is that it's too expensive. People talk about specific models being too expensive, buying an entire army being too expensive, all that kind of stuff, and it can be too expensive. And if you start getting into multiple games, now you're having to buy multiple armies and multiple this and multiple that, and maybe I can hopefully kind of help you with that a little bit. When I'm looking at a new model or a new piece of terrain, my generally first thought is like, oh, that's really cool, I kind of want that. And you know, that's my own problem. But my second thought is frequently, can I use this for more than one game? Does this only have one use? Is this a very, very, very specific model that only works for, you know, just one specific title? Now, obviously, any model can be used for any game if you have enough imagine and believe in yourself. I get that. But there are times when you're just like, yeah, but this giant car that's this big, I can't pretend that this is a peasant who is being attacked by this dragon, which is actually a tank. You know what I mean? You can go that direction if you want to, but it's frequently easier if you can look at it and go, great, this is a person with a shield and a sword, and that might be a magical shield or sword, or it might not be because he's a historical miniature. You see what I'm saying? Looking at these models and trying to figure out what can I do so that I'm not only locked into using this one model in this one system and I have to buy other models for other systems, which then limits the ability for me to play other systems. Thinking ahead in that situation is a really good idea when planning out your purchases for miniatures and for terrain, especially terrain. Some of the bigger companies will help you with that. One of the biggest, obviously, is Games Workshop, and they will sell you models for Warhammer Underworlds, Shadespire, Night Vault, Beastgrave, the other ones. And those models, in many situations, can actually be used as part of your warband for Warcry, Age of Sigmar Warcry, which is this kind of skirmishy, smaller version of Age of Sigmar. Also, a lot of those warbands can be directly put into Age of Sigmar as actual, like they have downloadable rules that you can just get for free from the website, and then boom, that's another unit in your whatever army in Age of Sigmar. So being able to use those models from all the way from the smallest game like that, you know, the Shadespires and Beastgraves and whatnot, up through Warcry and then up into, you know, full-blown Age of Sigmar army battle, that's really cool. Now, you can't quite do the same thing with the sci-fi version of this, Warhammer 40,000, because there is no equivalent to Warhammer Underworlds within, you know, the sci-fi version. You do have Kill Team, which is kind of equivalent to Warcry, so you can take your Kill Team models, and they're just basically straight up, you know, 40K models, and then eventually build upon them to give yourself a full-blown, you know, Warhammer 40,000 combat patrol at 500 points now with the new 9th edition, and you could grow it all the way up to 2,000, 2,500 points. The sky is kind of the limit, although money and space are also a big deal. Now, those of you in the audience who are historical players, you're saying, yeah, well, every model that I buy is designed for multiple games. And that's also true, obviously. No one really has a copyright on World War II. Nobody really has any kind of, copyright on the Visigoths and the Gauls and you know, whatever, the Greeks. And so if you buy models, as long as they're the right scale for whatever game that you're playing that's historical, that requires ancients or American Civil War or World War II, you can generally mix and match those models quite a bit, and that's fine. There's nobody who plays, let's say, a game like Bolt Action that's going to say, oh, you can't play unless you're using specific Bolt Action models. At least I don't think so. That being said, Bolt Action has a kind of a sister game, which is alternate history, and that is Conflict 47. So it's basically World War II, but World War II kept going on, and the technology kept increasing through all kinds of weird and nefarious means. However, you still need people who have a normal Tommy gun. So you can be buying models for, say, a game like Bolt Action, and then they can easily translate into a game like Conflict 47, and after you add in some werewolves and laser tanks, and then boom, you got yourself a second army. So again, these models are being used in two places. Looking for those situations outside of historicals, which I said, again, in historicals, you've got it nailed because pretty much any models that you buy will work in pretty much any other game as long as they're the right scale and the right era, whatever. But for games that aren't historicals, there are still places you can look to double up, sometimes even triple up your models. So you got your person with your sword and your shield. Maybe they're a normal sword and shield because they're some sort of historical, figure, or maybe it's a magic sword and a shield because they are special creatures from the such and such lands who have come back to reclaim their glory. And whether it's historical or fantasy, you have those possibilities. But what about the terrain? Terrain usually has multiple uses. You can take a building that is kind of a let's say kind of Tudor style, old European look, and it could be an actual European building, or it could be, something else. It could be a fantasy building, and it all really depends on who's on the board next to it. Is it skeletons, or is it just regular people with, swords and bows and stuff like that? So those types of things work real well. There are certain things that don't work real well. In my opinion, much of Games Workshop's Warhammer 40,000 models, frankly, are too skull encrusted for most other sci-fi games. There's plenty of terrain out there that works great in all kinds of different sci-fi games. And again, there's no reason that you can't use your ruined skull-covered buildings in regular sci-fi, but I personally just find that normal sci-fi looks a little weird sometimes with that backdrop of skulls on top of skulls on top of skulls. So it kind of depends, but it's totally up to you. And some of the stuff that they're making now is, doesn't look like that as much either. So that's also kind of a benefit for making a piece of terrain that you can use in multiple systems. Games like Malifaux are designed probably from the get-go. I think the developers did this on purpose, but the story behind the city of Malifaux is that it is many different types of architecture from all kinds of different eras and potentially even different dimensions. So there's Japanese stuff, there's Egyptian stuff, there's stuff that nobody recognizes, and that kind of gives you the benefit in a game like Malifaux to be able to put whatever kind of terrain you might already have and put it on the table and do your own thing with it. They also make their own terrain, which is also very interesting and kind of steampunkish to a degree, but the way that the game is designed is, from what I remember of reading the fluff in that, it's that the city of Malifaux, as soon as I read that part where they were like, there's all kinds of different terrain, my thought was like, oh great, then you'll be able to use pretty much whatever you have. So which, again, you're doubling, possibly tripling up on some of the uses of your terrain. And then there's a super important type stuff to have, trees, or rocks, or any little things like that. But specifically trees, because in many situations, trees are trees. Doesn't matter if it's a tree that's sitting in a lone kind of fantasy world, or if it's a tree that's sitting in the middle of, ancient England, and it's surrounded by people who probably would have smelled better if they washed a little bit more frequently, but they didn't know, and so those types of pieces are important pieces to have on your table, and they can be used in all kinds of things. I specifically like the ones from Monster Fight Club because they can be a normal tree, like with leaves and whatnot, and then you can take the top off and now it's like a dead tree. So you could even use those in like a war-torn like sci-fi world as a backdrop for, whatever kind of battle you're having, and I think that that's a really cool system. Again, multi-use for a single purchase. That's really the important thing. When you're looking at models, when you're looking at terrain, can I take this and use it in a bunch of situations, or is it only good in one situation? There's nothing wrong with buying something that is absolutely perfectly purpose-built for just one reason, but sometimes you're going to want to take a look at something, especially if you're trying to save space and money, and think to yourself, can I use this in more than one situation? And in a perfect world, can I use it in 3 situations?